The western US is the biggest region of the country, covering more than half the land area of the United States. It is often known for broad and open roads. When I was planning my trip, I wanted to explore new sights and be near the coast. For that reason, I decided to travel to the coast of the West region, and the trip was just amazing. There was so much to discover, and I managed to fit it all into 1 week. I wanted to explore as much as possible, so I stayed in 3 different states: California, Oregon, and Washington. To make time for this, I could not stay at the same place for too long, and most days I had to wake up early to catch the morning bus. But it was most definitely worth it. I got to see many beautiful places with amazing landscapes, as well as exploring new foods and cities. This was my travel route. I started off in San Francisco, where I stayed for 1 night before my bus tour began. I traveled along the Mendocino coast and through Redwood National Park in California, the Oregon Dunes and Silver Falls in Oregon, and Mount St. Helen in Washington before I ended up in Seattle, where I had a whole day to see the city. There were more places along the way to visit, such as the Crater Lake and the Mount Rainier National Park, but I did not have time for everything, and I chose what I found the most interesting. The plane back to Oslo left at 6 p.m. from Seattle. The first day, I was traveling from Oslo to San Francisco. The first plane left Oslo at 8 a.m. to Barcelona before my connecting flight to San Francisco. I arrived at 6 p.m. local time and stayed at a single room in Hilton Union Square Hotel. The second day, I got to see San Francisco. I visited the Golden Gate Bridge and met many people. They were very polite and gladly helped to show me the way when I asked. I ate at an American Thai restaurant called Blackwood, which had an amazing chicken noodle soup. To get to the Mendocino coast, when the beach was perfect and quiet, I had to be there in the morning. So I took the midnight bus from San Francisco with seats you could take all the way backwards. I slept like a little baby before waking up at 9 a.m. to being right beside the beach. The water was amazing, and I enjoyed the beach for a couple of hours before jumping back on the bus and heading to Redwood National Park. I got to the park around 4 p.m. and explored all the special things it had to offer. I slept in the national park at Emerald Forest Cabin in a twin-bedded room. The fourth day, I had to wake up very early to get to the Oregon Dunes. I wasn't staying there for too long because I also wanted to see the Silver Falls before sunset. The falls were spectacular to look at. I ate right beside the hotel before sleeping in at Anchor Bay Inn. On the fifth day, I was going to Washington, but I decided to visit Mount St. Helen on the way. After watching the stratovolcano for a while, I took the bus to Seattle. I got there very late and stayed in a single room at Pioneer Square Hotel, which is located in downtown Seattle. Day 6, I had most of the day to explore Seattle. I even bought a little souvenir. My flight back to Oslo left at 6 p.m. and I spent the last day of the vacation on a plane until I landed at Gardermoen. This is a rough estimate of the costs of my trip. It was not easy on a tight budget, and to be honest, it went a little above, but not too much. I had a little extra in my account. I found some cheap plane tickets and hotels that were of reasonable prices. I even sat $27 for guided tours that were perfect when being at Redwood National Park. Talking about the Redwood National Park, we got a very good guided tour covering the most famous parts of the park. It is located by the coast of the Pacific Ocean, and the park contains many of the biggest tree sorts in the world, with trees standing at over 100 meters. But the park wasn't just trees. There were a lot of animals and rivers to look at as well. The Mendocino coast was beautiful. The stones formed an amazing landscape, and the water was really clear. It was nice having some hours at the beach, a little break from the traveling. The Silver Falls is called the crown jewel of the Oregon State Park system, and it was clear to see why. The waterfalls were spectacular, and I could even walk on trails behind some of them. We went on a trail which passed a series of breathtaking waterfalls along a rocky canyon. When I arrived at the Oregon dunes, I was going to explore on foot, but then I saw people sandboarding down the dunes and I simply had to try. For only $5, I rented a sandboard and it was a lot of fun. The thing I liked the most about the Oregon dunes was that it's a very different climate here compared to the other places I went. On my way to Washington, I wanted to see the famous Mount St. Helens, which is an active stratovolcano, part of the Cascade Mountains. It is very famous for its outbreak in 1980 that was the most deadly and economic hurtful outbreak in the history of the US. I followed trails to different watch points before heading back to the bus to Seattle. Some geographical facts about the places I went is that all three states I visited have a coastline, and the Cascade Mountains goes all the way from California via Oregon to Washington. The coastline was part of the reason I chose the West Coast because I wanted the opportunity to visit the beach. And of course, I had to taste new food that the towns I visited are known for. In San Francisco, I had the sourdough bread, which was popularized during the gold rush. In Oregon, I tried their famous Marionberry pie. It was delicious, but very sweet. Seattle is especially known for their seafood, so I tried their king salmon. The souvenir I bought to take home was a mini Space Needle. I got it in Seattle after seeing the town's most well-known landmark, the Space Needle. The Space Needle is a watchtower that stands at 605 feet. These are the sources I used for finding a souvenir, famous foods, hotels, sites, and tickets. I used Norwegian to find plane tickets and some of the park's websites to find the correct prices and things to see. I also used BusBud, which is a reliable website to find buses for the trip. The project was fun to work with, and I tried to get as much as possible into it. I think I managed to fit in all the criteria, even though I didn't have headlines like history. I tried to talk about it, for example, with the Mount St. Helens. The biggest issue I had creating this was that I underestimated the distances. I made it work, but the schedule is therefore a little tight. I learned a lot about planning a trip and making the costs work. Things I would do differently would be to limit what I saw and visited and focus more about getting a chill vacation.